Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar where we are going to be exploring the EU AI Act and particularly its implications for schools and colleges across Europe. My name is Darren Coxon. I am an educator. I've been in the business for 25 years as a teacher, as a head teacher, managed groups of schools in Europe and internationally, and also in the UK. I've bought schools, I've built schools, I've been an ISI compliance inspector, data protection officer, pretty well worn most hats, to be honest with you. And now I actually focus on, certainly for the last 2 years, focusing on this kind of intersection between AI and education. And I work with schools, colleges, groups, really all over the world, helping them to make sense of AI and helping them to bring AI into their schools in a safe and compliant way. And Clara and I have teamed up in order to move this to the next level with a focus on the EU. Clara, over to you.
Thank you so much, Darren. So just like Darren, I have more than 2 decades of experience in education. Also as a teacher, I've worked as a secondary school teacher and in universities as well. And I have also worked as a faculty educator and as head of digitalization. I have a background in computer science and in philosophy of all things, focused on global ethics. And I have specialized in artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence in education and in AI governance and policy. So over the years, I've worked a lot with different schools. I have also worked as the head of artificial intelligence for an international school group, where I've integrated, worked with the teams to integrate AI into the schools, conducted training, worked with policy building, and so on, both on the EU AI Act and the GDPR, but also on other regulation pertaining to digital use and artificial intelligence technology in schools.
So yeah, so as I said at the beginning, we're focusing on the EU AI Act and we're focusing on how this applies to schools. So maybe before we do, let's just sort of talk a bit about what we're doing, what campus education is. So maybe Clara, do you just want to kind of give us a brief summary as to what campus education is going to be offering over the next few years?
Absolutely. And I'm very excited actually about campus education, because part of my work in the recent year was to travel around to schools. And I've been to more than 70 schools in 1 year, doing workshops, meeting with senior leadership teams, talking to different administrative roles, marketing teams, admissions officers. And it became really clear that there was not only a need to understand what AI is and how these tools work, but really a need for building a foundation of AI governance. So I was very passionate about not only keeping children safe, keeping adult students safe, but also keeping our educators safe and everyone who works in the school environment. And by proxy, also keeping our families safe, because children take home this AI technology and use it at home. So we've come together, Darren and I, we founded Compass Education in order to support schools and colleges across Europe with AI governance, with leadership and teacher training. You'll see that occasionally we work outside of Europe as well, but our focus primarily is on Europe now because the EU AI Act has come into force and European schools really have the greatest need. Our goal is to ensure that every single school can use AI to innovate, to pioneer new ideas, but do it safely, do it ethically within the framework of the EU AI Act. And that is why we are here today.
Fantastic. So why does this matter? Why is it so important for us, both in terms of the EU AI Act, but also just more broadly as educators? Why is it important for us to be focusing on this right now?
Well, Dan, one of my most favorite things about schools is that I think of them as a kind of greenhouse. You can experiment with different seedlings. You can try different types of fertilizer, different environments in terms of water and light, and you'll get different results. And we want to continue to have schools be an area where we can experiment with new ideas in a safe space.
Yeah.
And what we have discovered in the recent years, thankfully, is that use of technology is not necessarily a good idea in schools and not necessarily safe for children and for adult students unless it is guarded, unless it is governed, unless we understand what we're doing. So I promote and you promote. This is one thing that we very much share, this need to innovate, but balancing it with safety. And because the EU AI Act has come into force in August of 2024, we now not only have a desire for this, but we also need to ensure that it happens across the European Union as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much about, there are so many potential benefits to this act. I mean, it's that balancing, as you say, balancing innovation with safety. It's the trust piece, which is just so important. Our ability to build bridges with our families, to show that we're doing the right thing by their children. That's just so critical. And then the kind of all of this being wrapped within EU compliance actually makes it, in some respects, easier for us. It makes it easier for schools to do the right thing because, quite frankly, they have to. But what is it? So, when we talk about AI governance, really, what we're talking about are frameworks. Okay, so frameworks for responsible AI use, rules, processes, procedures, quality assurance mechanisms, all of the kind of the stuff which you don't really see, and certainly as a teacher and as a student and as a parent, you may not sometimes even be aware of. But it's all that stuff that sits in the background that means that when the students and the teachers are interfacing with one another, they're doing it in a safe way. When children are using technologies, they're doing it in a safe way. When they're taking it home, they're using it safely. Parents understand the safe use of it, and so on and so forth. So it's things like risk management. How does the school identify what is safe AI, what is frankly unsafe AI? What are the guidelines that we're going to put in place? Making sure it's fair, making sure it's transparent, which we'll talk about that later, the critical importance of transparency, as well as the more kind of external legal aspects around compliance with the AI Act. Essentially, what do we want to do? Well, we want to make sure it benefits everyone. We want to make sure that the AI that we use aligns with our mission, aligns with our vision, aligns with our school values, that it becomes a seamless part of what we do rather than some slightly awkward bolt-on, which it feels like at the moment. Everyone's a bit nervous about using it. Teachers are a bit furtive about using it. They don't want to really tell anyone they're using it. There's just a degree of a lack of a bit of a degree of uncertainty around AI use. And I think what the EU AI Act will do is it will bring it all out into the open. This is how you can use it. You can't use it like this. You need this person to make sure this happens. You need this framework in place. You need this policy. That's it. It's just going to be much more black and white. I think just if I can just so one more thing actually, which I think is quite useful, because sometimes we tend to slightly confuse these different terms within schools: governance, literacy, security. Governance, as I said, it's about the overall strategy. It's about how we as a school set the direction of travel for using AI in a safe and an ethical way. So our policies are how we police those policies and implement those policies, how we report on those policies to the powers that be above us. That for me is governance. AI literacy is much more about how we just use AI on a day-to-day basis, what it is. I talk a lot when I do AI literacy training. I believe people need to understand a bit of the history behind it. How long has it been around? Who are the main movers and shakers in the AI industry? What is the potential for AI into the future? What is it good at? What is it bad at? What should we use it for? And should we not let it anywhere near? That's kind of AI literacy. It's kind of the nuts and bolts piece. And then the final piece is around security, and that really sits with the technicians. It's things like how do we keep our systems from being, hacked, the data breaches, how do we ensure that we're not allowing bad actors into our systems, which becomes even more important with AI, because of course now with AI, it is becoming increasingly easy for bad actors to get into our systems. So it's about how do we stay one step ahead, and how do we make sure we've got the right safety protocols in place. But also when we link into data security, things like how do we train our staff so that they understand what to look out for in terms of AI generated phishing attacks. Those are all the things that we need to be very, very careful about. So we need to make sure that when we're talking about governance, that we're really sitting at that top level, and that's really going to be at least our initial focus. But we are also going to be providing compliant AI literacy training and AI tools training, which will all fit quite seamlessly together. Whether it's worth maybe, Clara, just kind of going in now into a bit more depth on what the EU AI Act is, particularly when it comes to kind of the classification of risk.
Absolutely. And I think it continues essentially what you were saying and pointing out as well, that the EU AI Act and AI governance in schools not the same as IT and IT security systems. Those are two different things. So establishing an AI governance in schools will be new for almost all schools. There may be one or two outliers out there, but not that I have heard of, but it could be. The difference between the way we have done risk management in schools in the past, for example, GDPR, has been based on rights. You have a right to privacy, you have a right to data protection, and you have a right to have your information forgotten after a certain amount of time. But the EU AI Act is different in that it is based on risk. And so what the EU has done is they've built different classifications for different types of AI, with the first type of AI being what we call an unacceptable risk that is prohibited, and after February 2nd can no longer be used. So an example of unacceptable risks is something like AI that uses face recognition. An example of this is a school that may be using facial recognition software when the students come into class, when the teachers come into the school to take attendance. This type of use of AI technology is not allowed anymore under the EU AI Act. AI that manipulates behavior in some type of way, and AI that collects other biometric data, eyes information, fingerprint information, and so on, and uses it for some of these purposes in behavior manipulation, social scoring, or facial recognition, not permitted after the 2nd of February. It has to be discontinued in terms of use. There's some levels of use acceptable within law enforcement agencies, but for schools, this is a total no-go after February 2nd.
And then really the area that obviously we're most interested in, concerned with, is the high risk area.
Absolutely. And I have been asked quite a few times, so why are schools not talking more about this? Why are education ministries not talking more about this? But it is actually the case that when you use AI in education, in the annex of the EU AI Act is a little note that actually categorizes AI used in education as high risk. And when you're using high risk AI, the need for meeting compliance is very high. AI that is considered high risk, for example, is AI that's used to grade students. It can also be AI that's used to predict performance. Often, for example, that may be AI that's used by sports teachers or by admissions officers. to help predict how a student might perform in the future, or admissions officers that are using AI software to help them make decisions about admissions. It can also be the HR department trying to make decisions about hiring new staff for educational organizations. All of these types of AI are considered high risk under the EU AI Act, and the steps have to be put in place within the next year, less than a year and a half, I think a year and 5 months, to be in complete compliance if schools choose to use, continue to use high risk inside of their educational organizations.
So does that mean that therefore things like grading and performance prediction are completely outlawed, or does it mean that there have to be certain risk mitigations? I mean, some will be, but there'll need to be certain risk mitigations put in place to show that, for example, through using adaptive learning or grading of students, that you're not actually biasing potential their academic or their work pathways in future.
Very good question, and that's exactly the case, that you may have a school that has contracted with a piece of edtech technology where the system allows for the individual user to have the difficulty of the tasks adjust according to skill, and it's keeping up with the grades of the student as the student progresses, leading to a final grade. It's still considered potential high risk use of AI, but there's no problem using it because you can mitigate some of the risks by addressing the risks and being transparent with parents and with the users of this type of AI. Other forms of grading may be a no-go under the EU AI Act. Mm-hmm. For example, if a teacher uploads a student's essay to a large language model like Claude or ChatGPT or similar type of system where they've set up an individual account and use that to grade a student's work, that most likely wouldn't be possible under the EU AI Act, and certainly already wouldn't be allowed under GDPR. So that's just some examples of how you may or may not be able to use AI as you go forward.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And I guess sort of lower down, when we talk about things like chatbots, even though they're classed as being limited risk from a broad perspective, as soon as we push them up into work using them with under 18s, they automatically become, sit in that high risk category. That basically any AI use in schools with under 18 students will automatically be seen as high risk because of their potential to impact on young people.
And I think that's very important to recognize also the EU AI Act is risk-based. And so what that means is that all the other regulations we have, regulations about protection from discrimination or biases in education, rights to equal access in education, GDPR, Digital Services Act, and other forms of regulation that exist within the EU are still in place. So the EU AI Act is not replacing any existing regulations, it's building onto that. And as you point out, as a consequence of that, children and vulnerable populations, when you expose them to AI technology under the descriptors and definitions of different user groups, almost all of them fall under high risk with some exceptions. And I think chatbots is a wonderful example because we've seen a lot of educational technology in the last 2 years adding chatbots to their offering inside of their educational technology. But many of those chatbots are simply wrapped around a large language model that may actually not be compliant and would be considered high risk under the EU AI Act. So although it sounds fun, it's not necessarily the right decision to integrate all of these technologies without having a risk management system in place, and a conformity assessment for the EU AI Act.
So what's be quite useful actually, Clara, is maybe just to talk a little bit about how important this is in terms of our relationship with our teachers, with our students, and also with our families.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, when I'm out there on the road talking about AI governance, some comments, that it could be expensive, it will require resources, it's going to be difficult. And I guess I have to do it because it's the law. And I take a different position on this. I actually think that the EU AI Act is allowing us a pathway to really build a foundation for very exciting, future-ready education that's built with the most important thing in mind. How do we keep our students safe? How do we continue to teach them in a safe environment? And the EU AI Act really compels us to start doing that work. We skipped that with digitalization when computers entered the classrooms 20 years ago, and we went straight into using this without having these important frameworks put in place.
Yeah.
I think that that's really important. And then Darren, perhaps you can talk a little bit about also the issue around trust, how essential it is to build trust with our families.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know that trust is literally the oil that drives our entire education system. Without trust, we have absolutely nothing. And I think the schools that engender trust and develop trust are those schools which are most successful. I think AI is potentially so risky that if we don't ultimately have huge transparency with us, with our parents and the broader school community, that actually the damage that could do, for example, falsely accusing a student of plagiarizing with AI, it's proven that they haven't plagiarized, you've just lost that trust. That trust is gone. So I think one of the great benefits of this act is it's going to make it very transparent, and it means that we can innovate in a very safe and secure way, and ensure that our parents understand exactly what we're doing. I think when we look at Gen Z parents, millennial parents, we already see that those younger generations of parents have an expectation, are more socially aware, they're more socially conscious, they expect these things. And so I think as a school, these are things that we have to do anyway. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that, we as in education should be leading the way. I always believe, it often seems that we're kind of running to catch up in education, that the rest of the world seems to do stuff, and then we kind of think, oh, should we be doing it as well? This gives us a chance to be on the front foot. And I think that could be very powerful, both in terms of how we position ourselves as a sector, as an education sector, but also thinking more commercially, potentially, if we are a school which relies on fees, obviously we don't all do that, but so many schools, particularly the international schools across Europe, do generally rely on fees. Actually positioning ourselves as trailblazing, being, ahead of the game, very attractive for families looking for schools, very attractive for teachers looking for jobs. So I think if we're shown to being, really pushing forward with this safe innovation, I think that actually will be incredibly valuable for schools as they develop their offer. Now, maybe let's just slightly open people's eyes, because actually one of the things that we need to be very, very mindful of is what might happen to schools if they ignore this, and if they're fined. These fines are pretty eye-watering, aren't they?
They are eye-watering, and it comes from experience. The EU, after more than 2 decades with the GDPR, had realized that although fines are often issued for infractions, some tech companies had started speculating in fines. What's cheaper, breaking the law and getting a fine, or bringing the product to market and selling our non-compliant product. And the EU, the policymakers behind the EU AI Act really didn't want to repeat that. So they are hefty fines for non-compliance with the EU AI Act, ranging from 7.5 million or 1.5% of global annual turnover up to 35 million or 7% of global annual turnover, going with the higher of the two. And so it depends a little bit on the type of infringement, how gross the infringement is, and also the size of the company. So, for example, if it is a relatively minor infringement, the teacher brings a non-compliant type of AI into a classroom, uses the AI, and the AI says or writes a piece of text that is inappropriate in the classroom. These things can happen. It should be, of course, the AI tech shouldn't have been in the classroom to begin with, but much of it can be mitigated with managing that incident appropriately. But more severe infringements could be something like uploading a student's grade work to a large language model, taking the AI generated grade, having a real impact of the career opportunities and study opportunities of the student if the AI is grading unfairly without human oversight. Two much greater scenarios where, for example, school groups, we know that we see our school groups around the world are growing. They're adding more schools because the penalty wouldn't necessarily only be for the school. If a school is part of a larger school group, the penalty would apply to the global annual turnover of that school group, making it a significant amount of money and a very high risk for school groups. So although the EU AI Act in itself inherently is a law that can help us actually get better education and better use of text in school, it is also important to ensure that school leaders, investors, boards, governors understand that non-compliance is a very hefty price to pay.
Yeah, certainly want to take it. Certainly want to, yeah, not to ignore. I mean, we can compare it obviously to GDPR, and you know, there is plenty of precedent to show that it wasn't just words that the EU did. That GDPR was enforced and has been enforced across the EU over recent years. If we just look back over the last 10 years, Bocconi, one of Italy's largest universities, one of the big business universities of Europe, was fined 200,000 euros. And then we've had smaller fines, 70, 74, 26 and a half. Not huge amounts, but potentially, a 200,000 euro fine, is potentially significant to a school. But when we're talking about potentially millions of euros, then actually that does become much more serious. But, I think the reason we wanted to show this slide is because actually, it is it is the EU does enforce these things. It's not just words.
It is, and I think importantly also in the example of Bocconi, for example, what they did was they were using exam proctoring software where the AI system was monitoring students' faces when they were using the software. Certainly a violation of GDPR because they weren't properly informed about the data processing, but under the EU AI Act, not permitted at all. And this is also a very good example for example, universities that are offering online courses, and these universities are not located in the EU. So let's say a university in the United States or Australia is offering an online course, and the student is sitting in the EU, and they are being asked to use exam proctoring software with face recognition. This would also be a problem for for schools outside of the EU. And as you point out, GDPR has quietly just been issuing fines and taken away for the last many years, and often has in schools certainly has been as the consequence of parents or guardians filing some sort of complaint or student filing a complaint. But this will not only be the case with the EU AI Act, where there will be other ways that schools will face potential consequences on the way that they use AI in schools.
Yeah. So let's maybe talk a bit about, what the practicalities are of, building AI governance in our schools. So maybe Clara, if you maybe talk us through some of the steps, practical steps that schools need to be going through now, to move away from just talking about it to actually doing something about it.
Absolutely. And I think the most important question is really not to start with how should I use AI, but maybe why should I use AI?
Yeah.
Schools really need to identify what's their mission, what's their vision, what are their educational goals, what is it that they want to achieve for the students. And can AI be supportive in that? Because AI may not be a solution. We use AI for a lot of processes, but in the educational space, there may be other ways that take precedence. So why should I use AI? And how does it align with the mission of the schools? And once you've identified that, the first step is really to create clear policies. Students need guidance, guardians and parents need guidance, teachers, educators, professors need guidance, but everybody else that work within the school also need to understand how they can use AI, what part of their workspace can be operated with AI-driven technology. Mm-hmm. We know that many schools still don't have AI policies for academic integrity and for allowed or not allowed AI use on campus. Now is really the time to address this, to get that policy built and make sure that AI governance and the EU AI Act requirements are built into the school policy, and then share transparently with all stakeholders in the school. And then I think importantly, and we know this as well, Darren, because both you and I have been to many schools, worked with many different staff members in the different schools. But if you don't have a leader appointed in the school to help push the integration into the ecosystem, then it's just a workshop and nothing really happens. Mm-hmm. When it comes to AI governance, schools really need to appoint a leader, someone to take the lead as an AI governance officer, and AGO, as you said, or AGO, that's responsible for overseeing building this governance framework for the schools.
And I guess that role, often the data protection officer would often sit on the admin team. Certainly in my sort of background, I often see a DPO not necessarily being a teacher, but I can actually see the AI governance officer sitting more. It's more like the DSL, in the way that keeping children safe in education, make it very clear that your DSL does need to be someone of seniority. I can see that actually whoever is responsible for the governance of AI in the school does need to be someone of some degree of seniority, because obviously there will be a, because it's a compliance requirement, almost certainly not the head, but it could potentially in a very small school be the head, but certainly someone senior in the school who has that responsibility to oversee. It may also be, we've both been in group academic roles. It may also be in a schools group, you would have someone who has an overall responsibility for AI governance across a group of schools, having an AI compliance or AI governance officer across the schools. But the fact remains is you are going to have someone. You might hire someone in, we hired in third-party DPOs into a very small group of schools that we ran, simply because it wasn't economically viable even to hire a person. We actually brought in some third-party AI data protection governance. but that whatever you do, you're going to have someone or some people who have responsibility for AI governance. When it comes to kind of putting it into practice, what the practicalities and the training that sits alongside of all of these requirements, it's not just about training staff on how to use the tool in the school, in the classroom. It's also, how are we going to be training schools to understand how to audit, how to make sure that they've got the right tools and that they're not falling foul of the act. How are we, how are schools going to be managing and assessing these risks? There is going to need to be some training involved in that as well. How do you know, in that last point about how do we know which tools that we need to register with which authorities? There are so many different moving parts here that schools are going to have to be investing in some form of training, maybe at the governance level, the leadership level, the teacher training level, because there are so many things that, schools simply aren't going to have an understanding of the technicalities of this. So in the same way that we might have DSL training, we might have data protection training, we are also going to need some form of AI governance and leadership training just to understand all of these various moving parts. Maybe, Clara, just, thinking beyond that into sort of the day-to-day, what are the other aspects that we need to be, or schools need to be considering when it comes to the impact of AI in their daily operations?
Yeah, and I think, as you say, I think it's a good, actually, parallel comparison having a DSL, because we know how complex it is to work with safeguarding. It's an enormously complex ecosystem inside of schools, whether it's preschool, K-12, or universities. There are many moving parts, and to make AI governance part of daily operations, you really need to ensure that you're continuously addressing training for all staff, and also carefully informing parents and also teaching students what that means.
Yeah.
Because that is a big part of prevention, is also having knowledge. And what's important to know about AI governance and the EU AI Act is that not only is it a good idea to train the staff in order to keep students safe, it's also mandatory. If schools are using these AI technologies in the school, there is mandatory training under the EU AI Act that schools have to facilitate for all of their staff. We think that there will be some governments that will offer some form of meaningful AI governance training through the public school system, but we haven't yet heard anything about this right now. The way that it is written in the policy and what we've seen in the code of practice is that each school needs to ensure that they meet the mandate for training, and that has to be in place and operational no later than August of 2026, which means that the coming school year, so the rest of this term and the coming school year, is really the time to get this in place for the staff. In addition to that, communication with family is indirectly mandated, because deployers of AI, which includes the schools that use AI, are required to be transparent in use by issuing information such as transparency reports, and they should be easily accessible for parents and guardians and students, as well as teachers and other staff, to see how AI is used in the school. And finally, student data still has to be protected. All the other regulations that we already have, such as GDPR, are still in place, and AI can only be used in a way that they continue to be compliant with these regulations. Something that we unfortunately have seen a lot of in the last 2 years is that a lot of issues around this, because students have been using large language models in the classroom without a system in place for ensuring data privacy and user privacy in the systems. So really important is that we get to a point where everybody that uses AI in schools use it with a sense of confidence about how that AI works, how it is used, what the impact is on oneself, as well as the other users in the system, so that they can make the decisions about what kind of technology should be used for the different tasks.
It's also worth just kind of mentioning in that obviously we're focusing here on the EU and the EU AI Act, but we are seeing parallels in other parts of the world. So if we compare this to the UK government's position when they released the white paper just over a year ago, just about almost exactly a year ago, in fact. And they talk about what they call 5 cross-sectoral principles. So there are 5 principles upon which AI will be governed in the UK. There are differences between the EU AI Act and the UK's position, but there are more similarities, and one of them is certainly around transparency and communication. How will you, as a user of AI and a deployer of an AI system, ensure that those users of that system understand how you're using it and understand how you're governing it safely? So one example might be, in a school context, student reports. It would be very important, both from the EU's perspective, but also the UK's perspective, to ensure that parents know if a school is using AI to grade papers, to assess work, to do reporting. These things are going to be a requirement wherever you are in the EU or the UK. So it's just worth bearing in mind that you may be listening to it thinking, well, my school isn't in the EU, I don't have anything to worry about, I can just carry on doing what I want. Well, actually, that's not the case, because across the world, we're going quite right too. We're going to see these governance measures being put in place to ensure that we are being very transparent in how we use AI.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon referred to a bit, it's called the Brussels effect. And it's essentially the idea that we are starting to see government sort of copy paste the EU AI Act with minor modifications, but with the same approach: managing risk, ensuring that it can be used safely while protecting fundamental rights and for social good. And so we have seen in South Korea have just adopted something very similar to the EU AI Act. Brazil is working on the same, and we will continue to see this scale to other countries around the world. And as you say, in the UK, we will expect to see changes soon. And for anyone who works in AI governance, this year, 2025, is the year where we will really expect to see a lot of movement in terms of policy making and regulation in countries around the world. So this is a EU starter. But it will become a global phenomenon for good reason, because we want to use AI, but we want to make sure that it's safe.
So let's maybe just kind of drill down into the timeline. Over the next year and a half, there are certain expectations that will need to be met. As you said at the beginning, the law itself came into effect in August of 2024, but the EU are giving organizations, schools and other organizations essentially 2 years, but there are certain points that we're going to be coming up against in the next few weeks, few months, and then year and a half that schools need to be mindful of.
Absolutely. And I think the first one we talked about is February 2nd, February 2025, where schools have to address this need for AI literacy training. The training has to be in place by August 2nd, 2026, because that's when the law becomes fully applicable. So there's very little time for schools to do this. And as as you pointed out earlier, very important that both leadership teams and the person that has been appointed to take the lead on AI governance get the training that they need so they can help facilitate the greater training for the teachers across the and educators across the campus space and other staff members that work in education. And this is also when we'll see a ban on what's considered harmful AI or unacceptable risk AI, such as the social scoring systems, face recognition software, AI that measures biometric data, and so on. And then the next big step will be in May, where we will be expecting the final version of the Code of Practice for AI in Education. So these guidelines have been developed both by policymakers, but also with the public. The public have been invited to give their input on the Code of Practice. And by May, we will have more detailed information about how each nation will integrate the EU AI Act, how it will monitor it, how it will oversee it, how it will conduct inspections for compliance, or and how it will look at breaches that have taken place in terms of the EU AI Act and complaints that have come in. So we will have much more information on that in May. Right now we have the drafts, but it will be in place by May 2nd. And then the big one, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, August 2nd. That's the one I think about as the real big line, because decisions have to be made by this time.
Yeah, so I mean, I think by August of this year, you know, these governance and oversight mechanisms, we need to be seeing them in place. Obviously, in terms of fines and the policing, that's, you know, from August of 26. So we've essentially got a year from 25. But we, you know, these things will take time to put in place. So the EU expects that by August of this year, you know, these mechanisms for oversight and governance of AI are beginning to be put in place. So things like appointing an AI ethics committee, you know, appointing an AI governance officer or AI compliance officer, whatever you want to call it. It's no strict name. It's just someone who has responsibility for the governance and the compliance and the monitoring of AI use across the school, across the group of schools. You know, you might expect to see, in the same way that the head teacher of a school might give a termly report to governors on safeguarding, that actually they should be bringing in a termly report to governors with AI as well, you know, how it's being used, any potential breaches, you know, how the school's dealt with any concerns. You know, an example might be a parent complains about how a teacher has accused their child of using AI to write an essay, but the child denies it, etc., etc. You get the idea. These are the sorts of things that do need to be reported on. So we will expect to see by August of this year schools beginning to put these structures in place. But I think, you know, what Clara and I firmly believe, and we've been talking about this a lot over the last few months, that's it. You shouldn't be starting that now. You should be starting it now, you know, because we need to be thinking about, you know, if you're going to have an AI governance officer in your school, well, who is that going to be? Are you going to be you know, getting someone trained up internally? Are you going to be in a schools group hiring someone into that role? So this is not something you can just start thinking about in August. You know, it really needs to be thought about and acted on now.
Absolutely. And I think importantly, even running an audit on all of the AI system can take many months, and because it is such a complex use of AI technology in schools, so many different forms of use. And so in order for schools to even assess the specific use and need for unique training needs that school might be facing, it's important to have that audit in place. And schools now need to begin identifying how they want to do that internally, hire in, use expert help from the outside, whichever system that may be. But as you can see from the overview of the key dates here, it really is a work that needs to be started immediately, and decisions have to be taken very soon as a high priority matter for educational organizations. And I might add also for youth sports organizations that use many of the same types of technologies as well.
Yeah, it's worth bearing in mind that, obviously our focus as school leaders and school teachers is K-12, but it's not just that. It's anyone who works with children under the age of 18. That's it. So if you're working in an educational context, so sports teams is the same, drama groups is the same. It doesn't matter. It's clubs, Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, all of this kind of thing. This is all these all have an impact. We need to be mindful of this with any. It's like safeguarding. It's the same thing. We have safeguarding practices, keeping children safe in education. DSLs need to be seen not just in a K-12 school. So this is why we have to make sure that if we're working with young people, we're taking this seriously. The other one to bear in mind in August of 25 is the any general purpose AI model. So if we're using these models, these chatbots, etc., inside of our schools, that there will be certain obligations that will need to be met, and certain documentation that we're going to have on record to show that we are using them in a compliant way and that we understand how they work, we understand their limitations, so that we're not just blindly bringing in the latest shiny tool, that we've actually taken the time to understand how these tools work and what the benefits and potential risks of the tools are. And then, as Clara said, look, August of 26, that's when it becomes legally enforceable. I mean, it's legally enforceable now, but it's legally binding, but it will become legally enforceable in terms of fines, etc., from August of next year.
Exactly. And I think importantly also, the EU AI Act may make it necessary either to eliminate certain forms of technology from campus that simply cannot become compliant, or renegotiate contracts with educational technology companies, because just like education organizations, not just K-12, but also universities, vocational schools, adult online schools, etc. Everything under the umbrella of education have all of these requirements put on them. Technology companies also have, as providers of the technology, strict regulations, and to meet some of the requirements may mean that they have to take away certain functionalities in their technology, which may make the technology less attractive to the school. I think that as a consequence, we will see a thinning out of technologies in schools for a time. So that we will have safer, better technology in school until technology companies really rebuild their designs with compliance in mind rather than profit.
Yeah. I think we'll get rid of quite a lot of the AI snake oil, which is going to be a good thing ultimately, because much of it doesn't offer any benefits whatsoever to children and their learning and their development. So let's maybe talk about what we can do, and what the focus of Compass is, and how we can actually help with some of these aspects. Well, the first one is training. Obviously, this is what we do. This is what we've both been doing for many years. It's what we're trained in, it's what we specialize in, and this is what we're going to continue to do. So we will be offering, training for leadership teams, for AI governance compliance officers, thinking about how we lead implementation of AI in a safe and ethical way, thinking about how we innovate safely within the classroom, and so on and so forth. So all of these AI, the training courses, there will be video courses, obviously sort of online training, but also face-to-face. It's actually really important with some of these higher risk and higher impact processes, the things that we need to bring into our schools, that actually the training itself obviously is going to be higher impact. So we will be offering face-to-face and video training across the piece, that we're currently developing and which will be available soon.
Absolutely. And along with that, we also can help with development of policy frameworks for organizations, not just for AI governance, but because of our background, also for how to build that into policies around academic integrity and AI use for staff and students in the schools. We also can help educational organizations with audits of the AI systems. Either schools may want to have their lead AI governance officer do the audits, and that person need training on and guidance from us and how to do the audit, or they may want us to come and do the audits in the school, as well as developing risk management systems. And that is unquestionably where our almost 50 years shared experience in education comes in handy, because educational organizations are incredibly complex. Technology is used in a very complex way with all of the different stakeholders in the ecosystem of a school. And we are very experienced in building risk management systems using technology in the schools, and help schools make better decision making around the AI tool implementation in the schools. And Darren, maybe you can talk a little bit about our partnerships as well.
Yeah, so look, we obviously recognize that this is a very large challenge that we have. There is a lot to do, and there are a lot of schools across Europe that are going to need support. So we are going to be looking for partners to work with us. So we will be doing some partnership training where we will offer that high level of detailed and sort of comprehensive training to people who would like to take this on in their home country. Obviously, you know, in terms of the language issue, in terms of the understanding of the framework within which each of these schools is operating at the local country level, these are things that we're going to need to form partnerships to do. So we will be giving more information on that very soon. But we are absolutely going to be looking for people who wish to join us, who wish to partner with us to support this training across the EU, and obviously potentially beyond. And then we're going to be providing a webinar as well, Clara, a much more detailed webinar very soon.
Absolutely. And our first focus is on our school leaders, senior leadership teams, as well as the AI governance officers, and perhaps other members of the staff in school. Could be the DSL, it could be other members of the school team, head of IT, who could benefit from this as well, and who would ultimately be part of the AI oversight on campus. And we will then scale it out to the greater staff, administrative staff, and then a teacher option or educator option as well. And in addition to that, we will not only work with everybody on the steps of AI governance, very in-depth training, but also deliver at the same time through our webinars different tools that schools can use to help them automate some of the tasks that are required under the EU AI Act.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying, you know, we talk a lot about the risk management of AI, but also from a governance and a leadership perspective, we also need to be mindful of the fact that actually some of these tools can really help us with that. You know, they can actually help speed up some of these processes, which is obviously quite beneficial when we're quite strapped for time. Our website's there, easy to remember, compass.education. Our contact details are on the screen now, so our numbers and again the email address. So do reach out. You know, if you're interested in learning more, you can go onto our website. It's a work in progress, the website. We're adding blog posts. We're going to add more videos to it in due course. So we will be fleshing out this website to make sure that it's of use to everyone. So reach out, get in touch. We'd be delighted to work with you. We'd be delighted to work for you. But for now, I wish you a very happy time ahead and a fantastic term ahead. And we look forward to hopefully working with you soon.
Absolutely, I would say the same. The future actually looks very excited. It's thrilling that we have the regulation now to build a framework where we can have our students learn in a safe space, and allowing for our schools, our universities, our vocational schools to go back to what they're doing best, facilitating excellence in education, in a safe space, in a creative space, and enjoying their learning together on campus. So we look forward to chatting with you more about this in the time to come.
Thanks very much.